My dad didn't just ruin my laptop. He slammed it against my head the night before my final thesis defense and spat out the words, "Parasite, you don't deserve a future. Stay with me, because this is the night my life split into two, before and after." I was 23, in my last year of architecture school, living in a small town in Indiana. My whole semester had been building toward tomorrow, the day I would defend my thesis. It was my ticket to a future I had worked for since high school. But that night, my father, Russell Carter, decided it didn't matter. Russell had always been the kind of man who needed control over everything, from the clothes I wore to the people I spoke to. He ran the family auto shop like a dictator, and he expected me to work there after graduation. I had told him many times I didn't want that life, that I wanted to design buildings, not repair cars. He saw that as rebellion. That evening, the argument started small, about why I wouldn't be reasonable and join the shop. I tried to walk away, but he followed me, his voice getting louder, his face red with anger. "You think you're better than us? That fancy degree means nothing without me paying for it." I told him I didn't need his permission for my life. That was the breaking point. He grabbed my laptop, the one with my entire thesis on it, and before I could stop him, he swung it hard. The corner of it hit my head, and I stumbled back, feeling warm blood at my temple. I remember gasping, not just from the pain but from the shock. Then I saw the laptop crash to the floor, the screen shattering, my work gone in an instant. Months of sleepless nights, hours of designing, every note, every drawing gone. I could barely breathe. My father stood there, chest heaving, looking at me like I was a stranger. "You don't deserve a future," he said again, slow and cold, before turning away. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just left. I grabbed my purse from the chair, still in my slippers, my head throbbing. The air outside was freezing, but I didn't care. My legs carried me down the street, away from that house, away from the man who was supposed to protect me but instead destroyed everything. I didn't have a plan. No coat, no place to sleep, not even a phone charger. Just the pounding in my head and the echo of his voice in my ears. That night, the future I had imagined collapsed, but I didn't know yet that walking out that door was also the first step toward taking it back. The night air felt heavier than usual, like it was pressing down on my shoulders. I walked without knowing where I was going, my slippers slapping softly against the cold pavement. Streetlights hummed above me, casting long shadows that seemed to follow me wherever I went. Every step was filled with the echo of my father's words, each one cutting deeper than the bruise on my head. I kept replaying moments from my life, like an old film stuck on loop. I remembered being 10 years old, proudly showing him my first A+ in art class. He didn't smile. He just glanced at the paper and said, "Why not math? Drawing won't feed you." I remembered being 16, telling him I wanted to study architecture, only for him to laugh and say, "You're not smart enough for that. Stick to something simple." And I remembered countless nights in college when he would call, reminding me that he was paying for everything and could pull the plug anytime. The cold started to seep into my bones, but I kept walking. I didn't want to stop. Stopping meant thinking about how I had no home to go back to, no backup plan, no thesis. Sometime before dawn, my legs gave out in front of a 24-hour diner. The smell of coffee and fried bacon drifted through the door every time someone went in or out. I sat on a bench just outside, pulling my knees to my chest. My head throbbed where the laptop had hit, but the numbness in my chest was worse. I didn't even realize I'd closed my eyes until a voice broke through. "Alyssa? Oh my God, is that you?" I looked up to see Jenna Brooks, someone I hadn't spoken to since high school. She'd been one of the few people who was nice to me back then, even though we weren't close. She was wearing a black apron with the diner's logo, her hair tied back in a messy bun. "What happened to you? Never mind, come inside. You're freezing." Before I could protest, she took my arm and guided me into the warmth of the diner. The blast of heat made my skin tingle painfully, and the smell of fresh coffee hit me all at once. She led me to a booth in the corner and slid a steaming mug toward me. We sat in silence for a moment before she finally asked, "So, what's going on?" My throat tightened, but the words came anyway. "I lost my project," I said, staring at the coffee. "And maybe my future." Jenna didn't say anything at first. She just reached across the table and put her hand over mine. In that small gesture, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Someone cared. I didn't know it then, but this was the first sign that maybe I wasn't completely alone after all. The coffee Jenna gave me had barely started to warm me when a thought hit me, so suddenly I nearly spilled it. My heart began pounding in my chest, the USB drive. Months ago, I had copied some of my thesis drafts onto an old flash drive I left in the campus studio. It wouldn't have the final version, but maybe it had enough to rebuild something. "I need to go," I blurted out, already sliding from the booth. Jenna looked concerned. "Alyssa, it's 5 in the morning. Where are you?" but I was already halfway out the door. The streets were quiet except for the distant hum of a delivery truck. I wrapped my arms tighter around myself as I hurried toward campus. Every step, my brain replayed the image of my smashed laptop on the... I couldn't let all those months of work die there. Sneaking into the architecture building wasn't hard. The janitor had just unlocked the side entrance. I slipped inside, moving quickly past the dimly lit hallways toward the design studio. The place was silent except for the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. My workstation was still the same, piles of paper sketches, rulers, and pens scattered everywhere. As I rummaged through the drawers, another memory stabbed through me. I was 13, excited about my first school field trip to Chicago. I'd packed my bag, memorized the itinerary, but the morning of the trip, my dad had blocked the doorway. "You don't need fun. You need discipline," he'd said, pulling my backpack from my hand. I'd spent that day cleaning the garage instead, listening to the laughter of the other kids fade down the street. Shaking off the memory, I dug deeper into the drawer until my fingers closed around a small, dusty USB drive. Relief washed over me, but it lasted only a second. This was just the first step. I didn't even know what files were on. I plugged it into one of the studio's communal computers. The drive word and a list of folders popped up. My heart leapt when I saw my thesis project's name, but when I opened it, my stomach dropped. The most recent file was from 3 weeks ago, before the biggest revisions, before the polished rendering, before the final structural calculations. 3 weeks. That meant I was missing the most important work, the version my professors were expecting to see tomorrow. I checked every folder twice, hoping I had somehow saved a newer copy. Nothing. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 15 hours until my defense. 15 hours to rebuild 3 weeks of work from memory, on no sleep, with a throbbing headache and a bruised face. The panic hit me so hard I had to grip the edge of the desk to steady myself. My breath came in quick, shallow bursts. I had 2 choices, give up now or fight like hell to make it work. And giving up had never been an option, no matter how much my father wanted me to. By the time I left campus, the sun was starting to rise, turning the streets a dull gold. My hands were still shaking as I made my way back to the diner. I slid into the booth where Jenna was waiting, clutching the USB drive like it was a lifeline. "It's not complete," I told her, my voice tight. 3 weeks of revisions are gone. The defense is tonight. I'm screwed. She studied me for a moment, then said, "No, you're not. You just need help." Before I could argue, she pulled out her phone and started typing. "My roommate's good with computers. If there's anything to recover, he can do it." 10 minutes later, we were at Jenna's apartment, a tiny second-floor place that smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent. The living room was cluttered with textbooks, mugs, and a half-dead plant by the window. Evan Price was at the kitchen table, hunched over a laptop. He looked up, pushing his glasses up his nose. "So, you're the architecture major with the broken laptop?" "Yeah," I said, holding out the USB. "And a ticking clock." He grinned. "All right, let's see what we can salvage." While Evan got to work trying to recover corrupted files, Jenna sat beside me with her own laptop. "Tell me what's missing. We can rewrite the written sections while he handles the tech side." We set up a rough system. I dictated the missing concepts. Jenna typed like lightning, and Evan muttered to himself over lines of code. The hours blurred together, the table filling with empty coffee cups and takeout containers. In the middle of the chaos, there were moments of lightness. Evan cracked a joke about my insane file-naming habits, and Jenna laughed so hard she nearly spilled her soda. At one point, Evan found a partial rendering buried in a corrupted folder and announced it like he'd just won the lottery. For the first time in years, I felt something unfamiliar, supported. Not tolerated, not judged, not criticized. Just helped. These 2 people didn't know me anything, yet they were giving me everything they could. Somewhere between retyping design notes and redrawing diagrams, I realized that if I somehow made it through tonight, things had to change. I couldn't keep living under my father's shadow, waiting for his next explosion. I couldn't keep hoping he'd suddenly become the dad I needed. I kept that thought to myself, but it burned quietly in the back of my mind. If I survive this defense, I'm cutting him out. No more phone calls, no more guilt trips, no more letting him decide who I get to be. By late afternoon, the rewritten sections were taking shape. Evan had recovered most of my missing rendering, and the apartment was buzzing with the kind of tense energy that comes before a big moment. The deadline was close, but for the first time since last night, I believed I might actually make it. By the time I stood in front of the mirror, dressed in my best blazer, my hands wouldn't stop trembling. I'd pinned my hair low and to the side, carefully letting it fall over the bruise on my temple. It still ached every time I moved my head, but there was no way I was letting my professors see it and start asking questions I didn't want to answer. Jenna and Evan had stayed up with me until dawn, polishing every page, fixing every rendering, and running last-minute checks. I hadn't slept in nearly 40 hours, but there was no time to think about that now. This was it. When I arrived at the campus hall, the atmosphere was tense. Other students paced outside the presentation room, clutching their portfolios like they were shields. My heart thudded in my ears. I could feel the stares, not unfriendly but curious. I wondered if they could tell I was hanging on by a thread. When my name was called, I walked in, every step heavy. The 3 professors sat behind a long table, laptops open, pens in hand. I set up my presentation, plugging in the USB drive that had survived the storm of the last 24 hours. It didn't start smoothly. My first slide froze, forcing me to restart the projector. For a moment, I thought I might break down right there. But then I heard Jenna's voice in my head from earlier. You've already survived worse than that. I took a deep breath and began. I spoke about the inspiration for my design, the sustainability features, the structural innovations. My voice was steady, even when my hands weren't. When questions came, I answered them like I'd been preparing for years, because I had. I wasn't just defending a thesis. I was defending the years I'd fought to keep this dream alive despite every roadblock, every insult, every time my father told me I wasn't enough. When it was over, the professors exchanged glances, whispered to each other, and then turned back to me. Congratulations, Miss Carter, the head of the panel said. You've passed your defense. For a second, I couldn't move. The words felt unreal, like they belonged to someone else. I smiled, a small, tired smile, and thanked them. As I was gathering my materials, one of my professors, Dr. Miller, stopped me. You know, she said, there's an opening for an elite internship program in Chicago. With your portfolio, you'd have a strong chance. You should apply. I nodded, feeling a flicker of excitement somewhere beneath the exhaustion. But as I stepped out into the hallway, the reality sank in. My father wouldn't care. I could call him right now and tell him, and he'd probably remind me that I still owed him. The victory was mine, but it was shadowed. Still, as I walked toward Jenna waiting outside, I knew one thing for sure. I'd done this without him. And that made the win even sweeter. A week after my defense, life had just begun to feel calm again. I was catching up on sleep, finishing small edits for my portfolio, and even drafting the application for that Chicago internship Dr. Miller had mentioned. For the first time in years, I could almost breathe without feeling someone's hands around my throat. Then the letter came. It was waiting in my mailbox, a plain white envelope with my father's tight, angry handwriting on it. My stomach twisted before I even opened it. I stood in the kitchen, tearing it slowly, bracing myself for the usual insults. But this wasn't just another outburst. The letter was short, written in cold, precise sentences. You will repay me every dime I have spent on you since birth. Tuition, books, clothes, food, housing, all of it. I estimate the total to be $74,325. Failure to comply will result in legal action. No love, Dad. No emotion. Just a bill. I read it 3 times, my hands trembling harder each time. This wasn't a father writing to his daughter. This was a creditor demanding payment. My chest ached, but not from sadness, from a deep, burning anger. Jenna walked in just as I dropped the letter onto the counter. "What's that?" she asked, glancing at my face before picking it up. Her eyes widened as she scanned the words. "Are you kidding me? He's threatening to sue you? For being his kid?" I didn't answer. My mind was spinning, flashing through every birthday he skipped, every dinner he ruined with shouting, every bruise I'd hidden from teachers. And now this, reducing me to a debt he wanted to collect. "You can't let him scare you," Jenna said firmly. "He's bluffing. And even if he's not, you've got proof of everything he's done. He doesn't have a leg to stand on. But he's my dad," I said quietly, the words tasting bitter. Jenna shook her head. "No, a father protects you. A father wants to see you succeed. This man? He's just someone who thinks he owns you. And you need to show him he doesn't." Her words settled in my chest like a weight, not crushing but solid. I had spent my whole life shrinking under his shadow, convinced that if I just tried harder, he'd finally see me as enough. But standing there, looking at his demand for payment like I was some bad investment, I finally understood. He was never going to change. That night, I sat at my desk and began pulling together everything I had: texts, medical records, witness statements. Not because I wanted a fight, but because I was done running from one. I wasn't his property. I wasn't his debt to collect. I was his daughter once, but he'd thrown that away. And now I was someone he should be afraid of. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. It wasn't enough to ignore my father's letter. I needed to make sure he could never use his power over me again. If he wanted a fight, I'd make sure I had every weapon I could gather. I started with my phone, scrolling back through years of texts I'd kept but never had the courage to read again. There they were, message after message telling me I was worthless, a burden, a mistake he wished he hadn't made. Some were just insults, but others were threats. I saved every single one, organizing them into folders by year. Then I dug out an old shoebox from the back of my closet. Inside were medical bills from accidents I'd suffered. A sprained wrist when he shoved me into a wall, a concussion he claimed happened when I slipped. I had always told the doctors it was my fault, but the dates and injuries told their own story. Jenna helped me reach out to people who had seen his behavior firsthand. Mrs. Green, our neighbor from when I was 15, remembered hearing shouting and seeing me with a split lip. My high school art teacher recalled the day my father stormed into the classroom to demand I drop my art elective because it was a waste of time. They both agreed to write statements. While I worked on my side, Evan dove into something I never would have thought of, my father's business. If he's this reckless with people, Evan said, he's probably reckless with money too. 2 days later, Evan called me over to his laptop with a look that was equal parts excitement and disbelief. You're going to want to see this, he said. On the screen were scanned copies of insurance forms from the auto shop. Evan had found public records showing my father had filed multiple claims for damages that didn't match any legitimate repair reports. In some cases, the cars listed didn't even exist. This, Evan said, pointing to a particularly glaring claim, is insurance fraud. And it's not small potatoes. If the authorities get this, he's in serious trouble. My heart was pounding as we printed everything. I organized the evidence into a binder, texts in one section, medical bills in another, witness statements neatly typed, and Evan's documents tucked into a clearly labeled tab. By the time I finished, it was heavier than I expected, like it physically carried all the years I'd been silenced. I ran my fingers over the cover. It wasn't just paper, it was proof. Proof that I hadn't been imagining the abuse. Proof that he wasn't the respectable man he pretended to be. For the first time, I didn't feel like the scared kid who had to do whatever he said. I felt like someone who had a fighting chance, and I was ready to use it. I waited until Saturday morning to confront him. The auto shop was always busiest then, with customers dropping off cars before the weekend. I wanted him to be surrounded by the life he was so proud of, the business he thought made him untouchable. When I walked in, the smell of oil and rubber hit me instantly. My father stood behind the counter, arms crossed, chatting with one of the mechanics. The moment he saw me, his expression hardened. "What do you want?" he said flatly. I didn't rush my answer. I stepped up to the counter, setting my bag down. My voice was steady. "I'm here to end this." He smirked, leaning back like I'd just told him a bad joke. "Oh, let me guess, more drama? You always were the family actress." I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick binder, letting it land on the counter with a heavy thud. His eyes flicked to it, then back to me. "What's that supposed to be?" I flipped it open to the first page, a printed screenshot of one of his texts. "You're worthless, and you'll always be worthless." Then I turned another page, a medical bill from the night he gave me a concussion. Another page, a signed statement from Mrs. Green describing the night she heard him screaming at me. He glanced at the pages but still tried to act amused. "You think anyone cares about this? You think this makes you some kind of hero?" I didn't respond. Instead, I turned to the final section. Evan's research. Copies of insurance claims, side by side with proof they were fraudulent. This time, his smirk faltered. His fingers drummed on the counter, a tiny tell I'd seen before whenever he was cornered. "You've been stealing," I said quietly so only he could hear. "And I have everything I need to make sure the right people find out." For the first time in my life, my father didn't have a quick comeback. He just stared at the binder, his jaw tightening. "This ends now," I said, my voice low but firm. "You stop contacting me. You stop sending threats. And you remember that I'm not the scared little girl you used to control. You come after me again, and this folder goes straight to the police, the insurance company, and every customer you've ever cheated." His mouth opened, but I didn't wait to hear what would come out. I closed the binder, slid it back into my bag, and turned to leave. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but my steps were steady. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking away because I was afraid. I was walking away because I had already won. Alyssa stood outside the courthouse steps, her file clutched tight against her chest. The morning air felt different, not lighter, exactly, but sharper, more purposeful. She walked inside and handed the entire folder to the district attorney's office, her fingers trembling only once before she let go. It didn't take long for the wheels to start turning. Detectives dug into the documents, cross-referencing every detail. The years of medical records, the screenshots of text messages that no father should ever send his child, the statements from neighbors who had heard the shouting through thin apartment. But it was Evan's discovery, proof that Russell had been filing fraudulent insurance claims for the shop, that really lit the fire under the investigation. Within days, Russell was served with a warrant. Alyssa heard about it from Jenna, who'd been watching from her bakery across the street. "They put him in cuffs right there, in front of the shop," Jenna said, voice low but eyes blazing. He didn't even try to fight it. Guess the big man isn't so big when the law's looking him in the eye. News spread fast in their small town. The auto shop, once Russell's pride, was shuttered within a week. Customers arrived to locked doors and a bright orange closed by order of the state sign taped to the window. People who had spent years sipping coffee in the waiting area and gossiping with Russell now whispered about him in the grocery aisles. And the whispers shifted, not about Alyssa being ungrateful or dramatic anymore, but about how much she'd endured without anyone stepping in. Those who had rolled their eyes at her teenage rebellion now replayed the past with a different lens. The bruises they had dismissed as clumsiness. The times they'd seen her walking home alone in the rain. The strained way she smiled when someone mentioned her dad. Alyssa didn't go to watch the arrest. She didn't need to. For years, she had craved some big cinematic moment of justice, standing in a courtroom, watching him led away. But in reality, she found that the paperwork, the quiet conversations with investigators, and the slow dismantling of his power were far more satisfying. When the police officially informed her of the charges, fraud, assault, and multiple counts of intimidation, she felt an odd sense of calm. Not joy exactly, but a deep, grounding peace. She had taken the truth, dragged it out into the light, and let it stand on its own. As she left the courthouse for the last time that month, Jenna met her on the steps with 2 steaming cups of coffee. They sat in silence, watching the traffic roll by, the town still buzzing with the latest scandal. "You did it," Jenna finally said. Alyssa took a slow sip, eyes fixed on the horizon. "No," she replied quietly. "I just stopped letting him win." The apartment was small, just one narrow bedroom, a kitchen that could barely fit a table, and a bathroom with a door that stuck when you tried to close it. But to Alyssa, it was a palace. She signed the lease with a hand that trembled, not from fear but from disbelief. She had done it. She had gotten out. Chicago's skyline glittered through the window, the river winding below like a silver ribbon. The air smelled different here, less of gasoline and burnt coffee, more of fresh beginnings. She unpacked slowly, each box holding pieces of a life she had fought tooth and nail to reclaim. Clothes, art supplies, a stack of worn sketchbooks, and finally, carefully wrapped in a sweater, the broken laptop. The dent on its lid caught the light as she set it on the highest shelf. It was ugly, the casing split along the side, the screen long since shattered. But she didn't keep it because it worked. She kept it because it was the last time Russell had tried to break her completely, and failed. It wasn't a symbol of pain anymore. It was proof that she had survived. Her internship at the design firm started the next week. The thought still made her chest swell with a strange mix of terror and excitement. She'd spent years thinking the future was something she wasn't allowed to have, that her role in life was to exist quietly in the background, apologizing for taking up space. Now she was here, with the city roaring beneath her feet, and every street corner felt like possibility. Still, freedom didn't erase the scars. Nights were the hardest, when the noise of the city dulled and her thoughts grew loud. She'd lie in bed, staring at the cracked paint on the ceiling, remembering the sharpness of Russell's words, the weight of fear in her chest. Healing wasn't a straight path, and she knew there would be days when it felt impossible. But there would also be mornings like this one, sunlight spilling across her desk, coffee steaming in her favorite chipped mug, a blank page waiting for her to fill it. The world no longer felt like a locked room with no windows. It was wide open, and she was finally stepping through the door. She stood by the window, watching the river catch the sunlight. Below, people hurried along the sidewalks, each carrying their own stories, their own battles. Alyssa smiled faintly. Her story wasn't over, but it was hers now, every chapter, every word. With the city spread out before her, and the skyline standing tall against the morning sky, she let herself believe something she hadn't dared to for years. Her future was hers alone. Did Alyssa make the right choice by leaving everything behind to start fresh in Chicago? Or should she have stayed and tried to mend the damage? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And if you enjoy powerful stories like this, hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one.